Hey, welcome back to the channel. Have you ever felt like the deeper you think, the more distant you become from those around you? Like the more you understand, the less people want to hear. It's not just in your head. Society has always been uneasy around deep thinkers, not because they're wrong, but because they see what others prefer to ignore. History is full of examples, from Socrates to Galileo, from Tesla to Schopenhauer. These brilliant minds weren't rejected for a lack of an intelligence, but because their thoughts made people uncomfortable. Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers, believed that intelligence was more of a curse than a gift, something that isolates those who see reality too clearly. But why does this happen? Why does society resist those who think differently? The answer lies deep within human psychology. Think about this. When you meet someone physically strong, you don't necessarily feel weak. You admire their strength. When you see someone wealthy, you might envy them, but it doesn't shake your core self-image. But intelligence? That's different. A deep thinker doesn't just introduce new ideas. They act as a mirror, reflecting the limitations of those around them. And people don't forgive that easily. Even in silence, an intellectual presence can make others uncomfortable. But why? Why does intelligence, more than any other form of superiority, provoke such resistance? It's because intelligence isn't just an external trait like wealth or beauty. It's tied to identity. We define ourselves by our thoughts and beliefs and understanding of the world. So, when we encounter someone who thinks on a level beyond our own, it's not just humbling. It feels like an attack on who we are. Instead of admiration, many respond with defensiveness. It's not arrogance that isolates deep thinkers. It's the discomfort their presence triggers in others. History proves this over and over again. Society doesn't just challenge deep thinkers, it actively pushes them to the edges. Their insights don't just challenge ideas, they challenge egos. And humans by nature will do almost anything to protect their ego from discomfort. Have you ever tried introducing a deep idea in a casual conversation, only to be met with blank stares or an awkward silence? Ever noticed how quickly people change the subject when things go beyond small talk? That's not coincidence. It's a defense mechanism. When people encounter someone who forces them to think, their brains go into self-preservation mode. Instead of curiosity, they feel resistance. Instead of engaging, they dismiss. This is why intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries often find themselves alone, not because they want to be, but because society subtly pushes them away. Interestingly, studies show that confidence is valued more than intelligence in social settings. People naturally gravitate toward those who project certainty, even if their ideas are shallow. This is why charismatic but simplistic thinkers gain influence, while deep thinkers who explore complex truths often struggle to find an audience. History is filled with populist leaders, motivational speakers, and viral influencers who thrive by telling people what they want to hear rather than challenging them to think. Meanwhile, those who question the status quo are often ignored or even ridiculed. This is the paradox of intelligence. The more one seeks truth, the more disconnected they become from the majority. And it's not just a social phenomenon. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that when people feel intellectually inferior, their brain's amygdala, the area responsible for fear and threat detection, becomes highly active. In simple terms, deep thinking doesn't just intimidate people, it triggers a primal survival response, similar to the fear felt when facing physical danger. But why? Why does intelligence activate the same fear circuits as a physical threat? The answer lies in human evolution. For most of history, survival didn't depend on being the smartest person in the room. It depended on being accepted by the group. Our ancestors thrived in tribes where social harmony meant safety. To be rejected by the group was to be vulnerable, and vulnerability meant death. This is why human brains prioritize social acceptance over intellectual pursuit. When someone highly intelligent enters a social setting, they unknowingly disrupt the tribal balance. Their presence challenges established beliefs as group dynamics and social norms. And instead of curiosity, this often triggers an instinctual response, one that perceives them as a threat rather than a valuable thinker. A 2021 Stanford study revealed something even more shocking. This rejection of deep thinkers is context-dependent. In one-on-one interactions, people feel less threatened by intelligence. But in group settings, the threat response skyrockets. Why? Because in groups, social status takes priority over truth, and someone who thinks differently, who questions too much, becomes an outsider. People don't just react to intelligence itself, they react to how others perceive them in comparison. When someone feels outshined by a deep thinker, their instinct is often to undermine or exclude them, not out of malice, but as a way to protect their social standing. This is why deep thinkers can find meaningful conversations in private but struggle in larger social settings. Psychology reveals several biases that explain why intelligence often meets resistance. One of these is the Dunning-Kruger effect. People with limited ability tend to overestimate their competence, while those with high intelligence often doubt themselves. This creates friction, as those who know little assume they know more, dismissing those who actually possess deeper understanding. Then there's the status quo bias. The brain prefers familiar ideas over complex, disruptive truths. Deep thinkers challenge conventional wisdom, which makes many uncomfortable. And then there's the backfire effect. When confronted with information that contradicts their beliefs, most people don't reconsider. They dig in deeper. Intellectuals introducing new perspectives often face this exact reaction. The digital age has only intensified this rejection of intelligence. Social media thrives on engagement, not depth. Algorithms prioritize content that triggers emotional reactions over well-reasoned arguments. The most viral content is often simple, catchy, and misleading, far easier to digest than complex, nuanced discussions. The deeper a thinker, the harder it is to condense their insights into easily shareable bites. As a result, society leans more toward entertainment than enlightenment, making it even harder for deep thinkers to gain broad acceptance. But if intelligence is often resisted, what does society truly embrace? The answer is comfort. People crave predictability over truth. One of history's most brutally honest philosophers, Arthur Schopenhauer, believed intelligence was not a gift but a burden. Unlike thinkers who saw intellect as a path to success, he argued that the smarter a person is, the harder it becomes to connect with society. His philosophy centered around the concept of the will, a blind, irrational force driving human behavior. Most people live under the influence of the will to live, prioritizing pleasure, comfort, and survival above all else. But deep thinkers operate differently. They develop a will to truth, an insatiable need to understand reality, even when it leads to discomfort. Where the majority seek pleasure and avoid difficult truths, intellectuals pursue knowledge, even if it isolates them. This creates a fundamental disconnect. Most people find meaning in relationships, entertainment, and routine pleasures, while deep thinkers often feel disillusioned by these things, seeing them as distractions from deeper existential questions. The more someone understands human nature, the harder it becomes to relate to others. They see through deception, while most social interactions are built on small talk, status games, and polite dishonesty. Society values simplicity. Deep thinkers crave depth. The result: a constant struggle to engage in everyday conversations without feeling bored or disconnected. Schopenhauer believed intelligence made people painfully aware of life's futility. While most chase money, power, and relationships, deep thinkers question the very purpose of these pursuits. This can make them appear distant, indifferent, or even unsettling to those around them. Their presence forces others to confront uncomfortable truths they'd rather ignore. He compared intelligence to a heightened sense of awareness, a gift that often feels like a curse. The more one understands, the less they can ignore. The more they see the world's flaws, the harder it is to find happiness in it. The deeper they think, the lonelier they become. For Schopenhauer, happiness and intelligence were inversely related. Ignorance, not wisdom, was the true key to happiness. This explains why so many deep thinkers throughout history, Pascal, Kafka, and others, have battled depression, existential crises, and social isolation. But Schopenhauer didn't just identify the problem, he offered solutions. He believed solitude wasn't a punishment, but a privilege. Rather than seeking validation from society, deep thinkers should use their time alone for intellectual and creative pursuits. Instead of trying to fit in, they should seek out those who think like them, through books, philosophy, or exclusive intellectual circles. He also advised against blindly sharing insights with those unwilling to hear them. Instead, he encouraged deep thinkers to observe, learn social patterns, and choose their words wisely. His teachings still serve as a guide for modern intellectuals facing rejection. Intelligence may lead to loneliness, but it also grants freedom, wisdom, and a deeper understanding of life. Schopenhauer saw intelligence as both a gift and a curse, a force that grants clarity yet isolates those who possess it. The ability to see through illusions and recognize uncomfortable truths often creates a rift between deep thinkers and the world around them. Society does not reject them because they are mistaken. It rejects them because they are right too soon. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your thoughts, it's not because you are broken, but because you perceive reality in a way most people would rather ignore. But does this mean that those who think deeply are doomed to isolation? Or is there a way to exist within society without losing intellectual depth? The truth is, the world is not designed to embrace deep thinkers. It is structured to maintain stability. People crave comfort more than truth, which is why shallow conversations, simplistic ideas, and repetitive entertainment dominate social interactions. The question is, why does society prioritize comfort over complexity? Why does it resist change, even when that change leads to progress? The answer lies in human psychology and the systems that shape our thinking from an early age. At its core, the human brain is wired to seek predictability. Evolution has conditioned us to avoid mental discomfort, a concept psychologists call cognitive ease. The brain prefers familiar, simple information because it requires less effort to process. When faced with complex or unfamiliar ideas, the mind perceives them as difficult, even threatening. People are naturally inclined to defend the status quo, a phenomenon known as system justification. Even when a system is flawed, most would rather rationalize it than challenge it because change feels uncertain. Groupthink reinforces this tendency, making individuals more likely to conform rather than risk social rejection. This is why those who question widely accepted beliefs often find themselves dismissed or ridiculed even when they are correct. The preference for comfort over complexity explains why intellectuals, philosophers, and visionaries are rarely embraced in their own time. In today's digital world, this pattern is even more pronounced. Who garners the most attention on social media? Not those who challenge conventional wisdom, but those who simplify ideas into easily digestible sound bites. Depth takes time, while viral damping content thrives on the instant gratification. Algorithms reward engagement, and nothing drives engagement more than controversy, outrage, or humor, all of which overshadow intellectual discourse. This creates echo chambers where people are only exposed to information that aligns with their existing beliefs, making them resistant to new perspectives. In this environment, deep thinkers who challenge mainstream narratives are often ignored, misunderstood, or even attacked. But this rejection of intellectual depth does not start online. It begins in the very institutions that shape our thinking. Schools claim to value intelligence, but in reality, they reward obedience. Students who excel at memorization are praised, while those who question authority are labeled as troublemakers. In the workplace, innovation is often stifled in favor of maintaining corporate culture. Politics follows the same pattern. Leaders who make bold, rational arguments struggle against those who simply tell people what they want to hear. History is filled with examples of intellectuals who were rejected in their lifetimes, only to be celebrated later. Galileo was imprisoned for proving the earth revolved around the sun, threatening the religious institutions of his time. Today, he is hailed as one of history's greatest scientists. Van Gogh died in poverty, his art dismissed, yet his paintings are now worth millions. Nikola Tesla revolutionized energy, but those in power saw his ideas as a threat. He died alone and broke, while others profited from his inventions. Society does not embrace intelligence when it disrupts the norm. It only celebrates it when it is safe to do so. So if deep thinkers struggle for acceptance, what can they do? If you've ever felt misunderstood for thinking differently, you are in the company of some of the greatest minds in history. Socrates spent his life questioning commonly held beliefs, urging people to think critically rather than accept tradition blindly. For this, he was sentenced to death. His crime? Encouraging people to think for themselves. Galileo's discoveries shattered religious dogma, and he was forced to deny his own findings to avoid torture. Nietzsche's ideas were dismissed as too radical, yet today they shape modern philosophy. Tesla envisioned a world of free energy, but those with financial power shut him down. Alan Turing's work saved millions of lives during World War II, yet instead of being honored, he was persecuted and driven to suicide. Hypatia of Alexandria, a brilliant philosopher and scientist, was brutally murdered for challenging the religious authorities of her time. All of these thinkers introduced ideas that were too advanced for their era. They were ridiculed, silenced, or punished while they lived, but their ideas later formed the foundation of human progress. Society does not fear intelligence itself. It fears what intelligence represents. change. But does this mean deep thinkers are destined for loneliness? Not at all. The key is learning to navigate the world wisely. Not everyone is ready for deep conversations. Save your most profound thoughts for those who appreciate them. Seek out like-minded individuals, whether in books, online communities, or intellectual circles. The greatest thinkers in history found ways to make complex ideas accessible. As Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Schopenhauer once wrote, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." Deep thinkers perceive the world differently, and that will always make some people uncomfortable. But that does not mean you should stop thinking deeply. Society needs deep thinkers. It just doesn't always recognize their value in the moment. If you have ever felt like an outsider because of your thoughts, remember this. You are not alone. While the world may resist deep thinkers, it is deep thinkers who push humanity forward.